December 7th, 1941. A tranquil Sunday morning, palm trees swayed gently in the Hawaiian breeze. The Pacific Fleet lay moored, bathed in the soft, early light. For many, it was a day of rest, perhaps church or a leisurely breakfast. Then, the sky erupted. Bombs shrieked, torpedoes sliced through the water, and the very air vibrated with the roar of aircraft and the thunder of explosions. In a single, horrifying hour, a nation at peace was plunged into the greatest conflict humanity had ever known. But how? How could such a devastating surprise attack, executed with meticulous precision, catch the world's most powerful naval force completely off guard? This isn't just a story about bombs and battleships. It's a chilling narrative of escalating tensions, strategic gambles, and a world teetering on the precipice of unimaginable violence. To understand the unimaginable audacity of Pearl Harbor, we must first rewind, far from the idyllic Hawaiian shores, to a world gripped by imperial ambition and economic desperation. The year is 1940. Across the Pacific, the Empire of Japan, a rising military power, harbored a fervent belief in its divine destiny to dominate Asia. Their vision of a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere was not merely economic. It was a blueprint for a new order, with Japan at its undisputed center. But this expansion came at a cost. Japan, a resource-poor island nation, was critically dependent on foreign imports for the very lifeblood of its industrial and military machine: oil, rubber, and scrap metal. As Japan aggressively pushed into China, seizing Manchuria in 1931 and launching a full-scale invasion in 1937, its imperial ambitions increasingly clashed with American interests in the Pacific. The United States, though officially neutral, viewed Japan's militarism with growing alarm. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration began to respond with diplomatic protests and, crucially, economic sanctions. The first major blow came in July 1940, when the U.S. restricted the export of aviation, fuel, and scrap metal to Japan. Then, in July 1941, following Japan's occupation of French India, Roosevelt delivered the ultimate economic knockout punch: a freezing of Japanese assets in the U.S. and a complete embargo on oil exports to Japan. This was a death sentence for Japan's war machine. 90% of Japan's oil came from the United States. Without it, their navy, their air force, their very economy would grind to a halt within months. They faced a stark choice: retreat from their conquests in China and Indochina, thereby losing face and abandoning their imperial dream, or find a new source of oil. The rich oil fields of the Dutch East Indies beckoned, but seizing them meant war with the Netherlands, and more importantly, with their protector, the United States. It was into this crucible of desperation and defiance that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stepped forward. Commander-in-Chief of Japan's combined fleet, Yamamoto was a complex figure, an admirer of American industrial might, who had studied at Harvard and served as a naval attaché in Washington, D.C. He knew the immense economic power of the United States, a nation he famously warned, "I can run wild for 6 months. After that, I have no expectation of success." But he also believed that if war was inevitable, Japan's only hope lay in a swift, decisive blow that would cripple the American Pacific Fleet, buying Japan crucial time to consolidate its gains in Southeast Asia and build an impregnable defensive perimeter. His plan was audacious and utterly revolutionary: a surprise aerial attack on the unsuspecting American fleet at Pearl Harbor. While Yamamoto meticulously crafted his vision, the American commanders at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Husband E. Kimmel and General Walter C. Short, operated under a cloud of conflicting intelligence and a misplaced sense of security. Washington was aware of escalating tensions, aware of Japan's aggressive posture, and it even intercepted Japanese diplomatic codes, including the magic intercepts. But the sheer scope and location of Yamamoto's planned attack remained a horrifying secret. There were warnings, yes, fragmented and often contradictory, whispers in the wind that were either dismissed, misinterpreted, or lost in the bureaucratic maze. Messages from Washington warned of potential hostilities, but often focused on the Philippines or other points in the Pacific. failing to convey the immediacy or specific threat to Hawaii. The sheer geographical distance of Pearl Harbor from Japan, over 3,800 miles, seemed to lend an air of invulnerability to the base. How could an enemy strike there, undetected? The answer lay in a genius of naval strategy, an unprecedented gamble, and a series of fateful oversights that would define a generation. The stage was set for a day that would live in infamy.
The seeds of the Pearl Harbor attack were sown decades earlier, rooted in Japan's profound desire to assert itself as a dominant power in Asia and overcome its resource limitations. Japan, a nation with few natural resources, had industrialized rapidly in the early 20th century, becoming heavily dependent on imported raw materials and foreign markets for its economic survival. The Great Depression exacerbated these vulnerabilities, as Western tariffs and discriminatory legislation stifled Japanese exports and migration. This economic desperation, coupled with a growing population and a powerful military-industrial complex, fueled a strong expansionist ideology. By the 1930s, Japan's military elite, emboldened by a nationalistic increasingly believed that territorial expansion through military conquest was essential for national security and economic self-sufficiency. They envisioned a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a bloc of Asian nations liberated from Western colonial influence, but effectively under Japanese control, providing resources for Japan's war effort and industrial needs. This ambition clashed directly with Western interests in the Pacific, particularly those of the United States. Japan's aggression escalated with the invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and a war with China in 1937. In July 1940, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt initiated economic sanctions, restricting the export of scrap iron, steel, and aviation fuel to Japan. Japan responded by moving into resource-rich French Indo, further threatening British Malaya and the oil-rich Dutch East Indies. The decisive blow came in July 1941 when, in retaliation for Japan's occupation of southern Indochina, the U.S. froze all Japanese assets and, crucially, announced an embargo on oil exports to Japan. This was a devastating measure, as over 80% of Japan's oil came from the United States, and Japan's existing oil reserves were estimated to last only 18 months in wartime. Faced with this critical resource shortage, a choice between withdrawing from its conquests or securing new oil sources through military action, Japan saw war as an inevitability. It was within this desperate geopolitical landscape that Admiral Isoroku, Commander-in-Chief of Japan's combined fleet, conceived the audacious plan to strike Pearl Harbor. Ironically, Yamamoto had serious reservations about a prolonged war with the United States. Having studied at Harvard and served as a naval attaché in Washington, D.C., giving him a deep understanding of America's industrial might, he recognized that Japan could not win a long war against the U.S. However, once the decision for war was made, Yamamoto felt a profound responsibility to give Japan its best chance at victory. However slim, his strategy was revolutionary, a surprise air attack by carrier-based aircraft against the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. This preemptive strike aimed to cripple the American fleet, especially its aircraft carriers, for at least 6 months, thereby buying Japan critical time to secure the southern resource area in Southeast Asia and establish an impregnable defensive perimeter. Many of his colleagues initially opposed the plan, adhering to traditional battleship doctrine. But Yamamoto, a staunch advocate for naval air power, threatened to resign if his plan was rejected. Formal planning and intensive training for the Hawaii operation, codenamed Operation Z, began in early 1941. A major challenge was developing torpedoes that could operate effectively in Pearl Harbor's shallow waters, which were only 40 to 45 feet deep. Standard aerial torpedoes would plunge too deep and embed themselves in the harbor floor. Japanese technicians ingeniously modified the Type 91 torpedo by adding wooden fins to stabilize its flight and reduce its initial dive upon water entry. This allowed the torpedoes to be dropped from a higher altitude of 66 feet at speeds up to 160 knots. Pilots practiced relentlessly, flying over high mountains and then dropping to just 10 meters above the water in Kagoshima Bay. Chosen for its similar topographical and depth characteristics to Pearl Harbor, this meticulous training, often in plain sight, demonstrated the extraordinary commitment to the mission's secrecy and success. By November 1941, the Japanese attack force, the WWII, was ready. Comprising 6 of Japan's most advanced aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga Soryohiro Shokaku, and Zuikaku along with battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and support ships. It was the most powerful carrier task force ever assembled. Under the command of Vice Admiral Kiichi Nagumo, this formidable fleet secretly departed Hirokupu Bay in the Kuril Islands on November 26, 1941, on a daring 3,800-mile journey across the North Pacific. Maintaining radio silence and choosing a northern route rarely used by commercial shipping, the force aimed to approach Hawaii completely undetected. The stage was not just set. The actors were moving, an unseen blade arcing across the vast ocean, destined for the heart of American naval power.
As the Japanese fleet steamed silently across the Pacific, a stark contrast existed in the American High Command, despite increasing tensions. A prevailing belief held that any Japanese aggression would focus on Southeast Asia, targeting European colonies, or the Philippines, not the heavily fortified Pearl Harbor. This conviction was reinforced by a series of critical intelligence failures and misinterpretations that would prove catastrophic. American cryptographers had, in fact, cracked Japan's diplomatic code, known as magic, yielding valuable insights into Tokyo's foreign policy. However, these intercepts offered little concrete tactical information about naval movements and, crucially, were not shared widely enough or analyzed with the immediacy required to piece together the full picture of an impending attack on Hawaii. A war warning had been dispatched to commanders in the Pacific on November 27, 1941, alerting them to the possibility of an attack. But the warning was broad, lacking specifics, and crucially, emphasized defensive rather than offensive preparations for a full-scale assault on a primary naval base. Commanders in Hawaii, including Admiral Husband Kimmel and Lieutenant General Walter Short, focused on sabotage prevention and surveillance, rather than deploying their fleet to sea or instituting a high-alert air defense. The assumption was that Pearl Harbor's shallow waters provided a natural defense against torpedo attacks, a critical oversight that Japanese ingenuity was about to spectacularly dismantle. Japan's plan was a masterclass in deception and technical innovation, realizing that conventional aerial torpedoes required deep water to arm and run true. Japanese engineers developed the Type 91 aerial torpedo. This groundbreaking weapon was modified with wooden fins to stabilize its trajectory in shallow water, a direct counter to Pearl Harbor's perceived invulnerability. This technological leap, coupled with armor-piercing bombs fashioned from converted battleship shells, gave the Japanese air crews the tools to devastate American capital ships at anchor. The WWII's attack strategy was meticulously choreographed, designed for maximum shock and destruction, to be executed in two waves. The first wave, comprising 183 aircraft, was a devastating mix of Nakajima B-5N, Kate torpedo bombers, IT-3 Naval dive bombers, and Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters. Their primary targets were the battleships and airfields. The Kates were assigned torpedo and horizontal bombing runs, aiming for the ship's most vulnerable points below the waterline. The Vals would dive bomb battleships and airfields, suppressing anti-aircraft fire and destroying aircraft on the ground. The nimble Zero fighters would clear the skies of any American opposition and strafe airfields. Approximately 45 minutes later, the second wave of 167 aircraft, consisting of more Vals and Kates, protected by Zeros, would follow up. Their mission was to finish off any remaining battleships, target cruisers and destroyers, and demolish shore installations and fuel depots, effectively crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet and its operational capabilities for months, if not years. The precision and coordination required for such a complex two-wave assault, launched from multiple carriers across hundreds of miles of ocean, was unprecedented in naval aviation history as the Japanese task force neared Oahu in the pre-dawn hours of December 7th. Two isolated incidents hinted at the impending catastrophe, yet both were tragically dismissed. At 6:45 a.m., the destroyer USS Ward, patrolling the entrance to Pearl Harbor, detected and attacked a midget submarine attempting to infiltrate the harbor, sinking it. The Ward promptly reported the engagement, but the message was relayed up the chain of command, losing urgency and context with each transmission. ultimately failing to trigger a general alarm. Minutes later, at 7:02 a.m., two U.S. Army privates operating an experimental -270 Seychelles rupees radar unit at Opana Point on Oahu's north shore detected a large formation of aircraft approaching from the north, approximately 130 miles out. Private Joseph Lockard, recognizing the unusual size of the formation, reported it to his superior, Lieutenant Kermit Tyler. However, Tyler, a newly assigned pursuit officer with limited radar experience, dismissed the sighting. He believed it was either a flight of American B-17 bombers expected from the mainland or a returning squadron of U.S. Navy planes. Tragically, the radar operator's crucial warning was misinterpreted and allowed to fade into the background. At 7:40 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft, having flown undetected through a gap in the American radar coverage, began their descent from north of Oahu. The aircrews could see the entire American fleet arrayed below them, caught completely by surprise. Illuminated by the rising sun, the Zero fighters immediately peeled off to strafe airfields, silencing any potential aerial resistance before it could even begin. Simultaneously, the Kate's torpedo bombers, flying low and fast, began their runs towards Battleship Row, their specialized torpedoes splashing into the calm waters of the harbor, destined for their unsuspecting targets. The silence of a peaceful Sunday morning was about to be shattered by an unprecedented act of war. The Kate torpedo bombers unleashed their deadly payloads, specifically designed with wooden fins for the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor to prevent them from sinking into the mud. Within the first 5 minutes of the attack, 4 battleships were struck, including the USS Oklahoma and the USS Arizona. The synchronized assault, which began around 7:55 a.m., rapidly descended into an inferno. The USS Arizona, moored in Battleship Row, suffered a catastrophic blow. Around 8:10 a.m., an armor-piercing bomb struck near one of her forward gun turrets, igniting the forward ammunition magazine. The resulting explosion was immense, tearing the battleship in two and sending a massive fireball skyward, with debris raining down on Ford Island. The USS Arizona sank rapidly, becoming a tomb for 1,177 of her crewmen, nearly half of all American lives lost during the entire attack. Nearby, the USS Oklahoma, an older battleship with less protection against underwater attacks, was hammered by as many as 9 torpedoes to her port side. Within 12 minutes, the ship began to list severely, rolling completely over and capsizing, her bottom and propeller rising above the water. Hundreds of men were trapped inside the pitch-dark, upside-down compartments as they quickly filled with water. Shipyard workers immediately began frantic rescue efforts, cutting holes in the hull with oxyacetylene torches over the next 2 days, managing to save 32 men, but 429 of her crew perished. The USS West Virginia was hit by up to 9 torpedoes and at least 2 bombs, causing extensive damage and severe flooding. Despite grievous wounds, quick counterflooding by her crew, including acts of bravery like that of messman 3rd Class Dory Miller, who manned an anti-aircraft machine gun, prevented her from capsizing, allowing her to settle upright in the shallow harbor. Her commanding officer, Captain Mervyn Espin, was mortally wounded on the bridge but remained in command until his death. The USS California, the flagship of the Pacific Battle Force, also sustained hits from 2 torpedoes and a bomb. A fire disabled her electrical system, hindering pumping efforts, and she slowly filled with water over 3 days before finally sinking. Tragically, many watertight compartments had been left open for inspection, exacerbating the flooding. The USS Nevada, moored at the end of Battleship Row, suffered a torpedo hit in the first wave, but attempted to get underway, becoming the only battleship to move during the attack. However, she became a target for the second wave and was hit by several bombs, forcing her to be beached to prevent her from sinking and blocking the harbor channel. Amidst this chaos, American servicemen, though caught by surprise, began to resist. Anti-aircraft crews on various vessels responded, and Army personnel fired with whatever they had, gradually increasing the intensity and accuracy of their fire. At nearby airfields, many aircraft were destroyed on the ground, often parked wingtip to wingtip, as a safeguard against sabotage, making them easy targets for strafing Japanese fighters. Yet, some acts of extraordinary heroism emerged. Second Lieutenants Kenneth Taylor and George Welsh, after being jarred awake by the attack, scrambled into their P-40 Warhawk fighters from Halawa Field. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, they repeatedly engaged the Japanese aircraft, shooting down multiple planes and providing a much-needed boost to American morale. Approximately 1 hour after the first wave, around 8:54 a.m., the second wave of nearly 170 Japanese aircraft commenced its attack. While the first wave concentrated on battleship row and airfields, the second wave aimed to finish off damaged ships and further suppress any aerial resistance. The USS Pennsylvania in dry dock was hit by a bomb, as were the destroyers USS Cassine and USS Downs, which caught fire, with Cassine exploding and rolling against Downs. The USS Shaw also exploded dramatically in dry dock after being hit. By 10 a.m., just over 2 hours after the first bombs fell, the Japanese planes began their return to their carriers. The attack was devastating. 2,403 Americans were killed, including 68 civilians, and 1,178 were wounded. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged, with 5 completely out of commission. More than 180 aircraft were destroyed, and 159 more were damaged. Japanese losses, by contrast, were minimal. 29 aircraft and 5 midget submarines lost, with 64 personnel killed and 1 captured. Crucially, however, the Japanese failed to destroy vital infrastructure such as the dry docks, oil storage facilities, and submarine base, which would be essential for the U.S. Navy's recovery. Furthermore, and perhaps most significantly, the U.S. Pacific Fleet's 3 aircraft carriers, the USS Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga were all at sea, and escaped damage, a critical oversight that would profoundly impact the war to come. The day of infamy had shocked America to its core, but the sleeping giant was now irrevocably awake. The attack on Pearl Harbor, brutal and unprovoked, solidified American resolve overnight. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, addressing a joint session of Congress on December 8, 1941, delivered his iconic Day of Infamy speech. With powerful words, he declared, "Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America, was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan." In a near-unanimous vote, Congress declared war on Japan that very day. Only one member, Jeannette Rankin, dissented. Days later, Germany and Italy, allies of Japan, declared war on the United States, irrevocably drawing America into the global conflict of World War II. The attack immediately united a nation previously divided on the issue of intervention, transforming public opinion from isolationism to a fervent commitment to war. Polls taken shortly after the attack showed 97% support for the declaration of war against Japan. Pearl Harbor profoundly reshaped American military strategy and global standing. The vulnerability of battleships, strikingly exposed at Pearl Harbor, underscored the ascendance of naval air power. The U.S. Navy, with its aircraft carriers untouched and its submarine fleet ready, rapidly shifted its focus. Carriers became the new capital ships, central to offensive operations in the Pacific, a doctrine that would prove decisive. Simultaneously, advancements in radar technology and anti-aircraft armament were prioritized. The nation's economy, still recovering from the Great Depression, was entirely mobilized for the war effort, leading to an unprecedented boom in industrial production and creating millions of jobs. Women entered the workforce in vast numbers, filling essential roles in factories and industries, a societal shift with lasting impact. However, the attack also had a darker consequence, fueled by fear and prejudice. The U.S. government authorized the forced relocation and incarceration of over 120,000 Japanese Americans, a stark stain on the nation's wartime history. Today, Pearl Harbor remains a powerful and poignant symbol. The USS Arizona Memorial, dedicated in 1962, stands as a solemn tribute to the 1,177 crewmen who lost their lives aboard the battleship, with 1,102 still entombed within its sunken hull. Designed by architect Alfred Prees, the memorial's structure, with its sagging center and uplifted ends, symbolizes initial defeat followed by ultimate victory and American resilience. It attracts millions of visitors annually, serving as a powerful reminder of sacrifice, resilience, and the cost of complacency. The American flag still flies from a flagpole attached to the USS Arizona's severed mainmast, a constant symbol of its enduring legacy. Pearl Harbor marked the undeniable end of American isolationism, propelling the United States onto the world stage as a dominant global force and a leader in international affairs. It not only shaped the outcome of World War II, but profoundly influenced subsequent foreign policy, global alliances, and military doctrines for decades to come. The complex legacy includes the eventual forging of a strong alliance between the United States and Japan, a testament to reconciliation and shared commitment to peace. The attack on Pearl Harbor, an event that truly lives in infamy, continues to offer critical lessons on the necessity of preparedness, the dangers of underestimating an adversary, and the enduring human capacity for resilience in the face of unimaginable tragedy. It shaped a nation and, indeed, the modern world, forever reminding us of the profound consequences of that fateful December morning.